our old boy Ezio, man about town and one of the best protagonists we've seen in a long time, and the character arc that graced 4 games in this series, and the one that did screw up the trilogy, is the title we're looking at today, AC2 Discovery for the Nintendo DS, where you can find all the hip new action-adventure sandboxes. This one came out pretty late for the DS since it had some features available for the DSi version of the system. However, in true Nintendo fashion, the only thing the DSi's additional features added was that the player could take a picture of themselves and have them appear on the in-game wanted posters, which is something that Snapchat lets you do nowadays with way more flexibility, so it's an obsolete feature. Now, unlike other long-standing franchise handheld games, Discovery is not standing on its own merits and bills itself as a literal side quest game to Assassin's Creed 2 that has quite the hard time fitting into the overall canon of that game and the franchise in general. After the AC2 failure to recapture the Piece of Eden late into Ezio's revenge quest, he gets drawn to Spain proper to help some of the local Assassins Guild with its silly problems, namely protection of a little-known historical figure named Cristoforo Colombo. There is some intrigue about the assassins getting infiltrated. The game is taking place during the Spanish Inquisition, which captured some more assassins. There's a small religious war, and the game's final boss is Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor, leading all of these atrocities. But first, in order to hopefully get some info on Rodrigo that Ezio could use, he has to acquire an atlas containing important maps for Cristoforo to begin his journey. The problem is that Queen Isabella is running out of cash due to the religious war she's been fighting and cannot pay Cristoforo to begin his long-awaited journey, especially with the Templars standing in the way of it, afraid of what he might find. One major issue connecting the game directly to Assassin's Creed 2 is that this game does the bad Magic School Bus version of a historical retelling, and basically has Cristoforo standing there listing off his achievements and all the characters saying how great he is rather than him being an interesting character. If you don't know who I'm talking about yet, Cristoforo is the famous Christopher Columbus, who does end up receiving funding for his voyage thanks to the assassins covering half the cost. Because apparently professional murderers can just cough up the money for 1.5 warships at the drop of a hat. While all of this is going on, you might have noticed the graphics of this game. They are a true blue ass, coming from the previously quality hands of Griptonite Games, who apparently had some problems dropping down to the DS's underpowered system and managed to make all the characters look like censorship bars for porn. All the characters are made of vaguely attached pixels, and it looks absolutely ridiculous. All the levels have these backdrops of buildings from Assassin's Creed 2 for no reason, since the player is not paying attention to them at all, and they don't add anything to the game for existing. But that may be for the best, since this game is a 2D platformer rather than a 3D sandbox. Similar to Altair's Chronicles, Discovery decided to embrace the platforming side of the Assassin's Creed franchise to bizarrely catastrophic results. The game has no business being a platformer, with so many of the levels chastising you and punching you in the dick for attempting some fast-paced deft jumps of awesomeness that would have been fun as hell if you weren't being consistently punished for doing so, and it instead falls back on the stealth elements of the game where you have to walk slowly and insta-kill anything in front of you. This would have been helped if the radar system of the game wasn't absolute pants-on-head stupid, but you take what you can get. The radar only displays vague, unhelpful enemy placements and nothing else, and since the camera extends to only about 5 feet in front of Ezio, trying to figure out where the platforms are in this platforming game is nearly impossible, and leaps of fate are required in all cases, and unlike the other games in the franchise, convenient hay bales aren't going to save you from this. Let's just say that the marriage of stealth and platforming was not one positively counseled by Griptonite. It's odd to say that the voice acting of this game is probably the best reason to get it, because unlike the previous Bloodlines, Griptonite managed to bring back the same voice talent from that game, but they bodged up the job on every character. Ezio's voice actor is the same guy who did Altair, and it's clear that the actor cannot manage more than his Arabian accent because he didn't even try improvising a comedy Italian accent for this job, and it sounds awful due to the lack of effort.
He admires Rodrigo Borgia, but I do not believe Torquemada is a Templar himself, merely a credulous old sycophant.
The wacky accents of Assassin's Creed 2 were so comprehensively goofy that it brought some spark of humor and lightness to a game about serious murder that was a joy to hear play out in the many cutscenes, while Discovery's cutscenes sound forced and bland to tofu levels. The game is supposed to be set in Spain, but you never guess that from the lackadaisical staffers Kryptonite pulled off the street again. I guess lightning just can't strike twice for these guys. However, the shit can still hit the fan, and Kryptonite's terrible gameplay design comes back in a flash of poo. The combat managed to actually be worse than Assassin's Creed 1, where regular attacks are actually impossible to accomplish and leave you vulnerable to all the enemies. Only counter kills can get the job done, and even then it's a major hassle. Halfway through the game you get the throwing knives, which are the most broken item in the entire franchise, since you can throw them and get an insta-kill on any enemy without targeting, and the range of these knives is screen wide. There are occasional knife pickups so you aren't really caught short, and a maximum of 5 that resets at every new mission gives you plenty when most of your kills are going to be racked up doing the insta-kill from behind move, which works on all unaware enemies, which occur just so long as an enemy never ever sees you. This is a 2D game, so figuring the enemy's line of sight is about as easy as telling the ceiling from the floor. The game design also hates your guts sometimes, with Kryptonite attempting to ramp up the difficulty of sections so ham-fistedly that they'd actually think invisible ceiling-mounted machine guns were a good idea. In some places, there are unmoving guards looking in your direction just because Kryptonite wanted to make combat required at random points in the game, just to give the middle finger to the player. Of course, these usually happen around necessary levers, and you can't pull them if you're in combat, so yeah, a pretty big fuck you all around when that happens. The game's ending is pretty much the final straw that broke the camel, because after a level full of stupid enemy placement, frequent platforming, instant death pits, and being the longest level in the game where being spotted 3 times means an instant failure of the mission, Ezio finally tracks down the Grand Inquisitor seeking to quote-unquote arrest all the assassins in their area. Torquemada drops a gate in between them and Ezio and then just runs away to safety. The game says that Christophe successfully made the start of his journey, and Ezio returns to Italy to finish the rest of Assassin's Creed 2. It would be unfair of me to not mention that the entirety of this game, 100%, can be completed in 3 hours, making it the shortest DS game on my record in terms of content, so literally no one gave a shit about making this awful mess. And yet Ubisoft decided to credit the entire company's staff on its development. Apparently over 100 people worked on this game, and it's ridiculous to think how. There is nothing to this game, and it looks like one that was developed in 6 months' time. The game is billed as a side quest to Assassin's Creed 2, something Ezio was doing in the middle of the game's timeline. Hell, Rodrigo wasn't even Pope yet by the time that this game was released in the canon. My question is, why didn't Ubisoft just cobble together a 3rd DLC pack for AC2 that would have made more sense rather than a DS game that no one would have ever played because it's a piece of junk? I wouldn't even recommend this game to the hardcore Creed fans because there's nothing to gain from playing it. It's so bare bones and so boring that there's nothing to be found here. It's a barely there story about how Columbus managed to get his famous voyage funded and sent on its way, and Ezio barely caring about this mission altogether, whining about how he has to get back to Italy after the assassins are saved, and they just guilt trip him into finishing what they want to do instead. The gameplay is pretty awful, with stealth being the worst. To do the stealth means stopping the fun platforming parts to have a long walk from A to B with generic enemies all in the way. Oh, and the game has a wonderful grading system that typically ranks you as a moron for over half the missions because of random arbitrary requirements the game only tells you exist while grading you for it. Multiple choice tests usually omit the question, right? Plus, the grading system is nearly pointless. The only thing that it unlocks is a handful of hacks you can use, such as skins and health regen, but because of logic, you are only allowed to enable them one at a time. Perhaps the Animus has become self-aware enough to detect cheating or some other explanation for this. Ultimately, the game doesn't even rank low enough to be interestingly bad. It is simply a terrible time sink and feels like a waste of your precious life to deal with its bullshit. solving problems that you have no stake in to complete a mission that does nothing for Ezio's quest, and finishing the game by once again failing to kill the final boss when Ezio had the clear opportunity. A plot that rises from nothing to continue to do nothing. It truly feels like a side quest game that could have been cleared up in an AC2 DLC pack for a quarter of the original price, rather than being chopped off and sold on a system that the usual Creed fanbase is not familiar with. Assassin's Creed 2 Discovery is an unknown entry in the franchise that will remain unknown due to its short 3-hour runtime, terrible gameplay and stealth, flimsy plot that does absolutely nothing for anybody, and pornography-styled graphics engine. If you somehow manage to find a physical copy of this game out in the real world, avoid it at all costs. It isn't worth the plastic that it was printed on. And with that out of the way, next week we'll be getting back on track with the main series of Captain Numskull's adventures in real estate development. But for now, let's light up the scoreboard and wave ourselves ahead with a well-deserved victory for gamers. Thanks for watching.